In Syria, you have two stories running side by side. On one hand, you've got this incredible, powerful myth of a 3rd century warrior queen who stood up to an entire empire. And on the other, you have the devastating, fractured reality of a nation in crisis. Today, we're going to dig into that connection because it tells us something really important about national identity, the stories we tell, and the incredible weight of history. So, that leads to a really fascinating question, right? How does a figure from the ancient past, a queen who took on the might of Rome, become so powerful that her face is still printed on money today, even as her country is facing total collapse? Let's unpack that. Okay, so let's start with the myth, the story of Queen Zenobia of Palmyra. You've got to understand, she isn't just some dusty historical figure. She has been crafted over centuries into this powerful symbol of Syrian identity and defiance against foreign powers. To get Zenobia, you first have to get Palmyra, her home base. And this wasn't just any city. Think of it as this incredibly wealthy oasis right on the Silk Road, a total cultural melting pot where Greco-Roman, Semitic, and Persian ideas all swirl together. This hybrid identity was its superpower, and it became the key to hers too. And believe me, she absolutely earned the title of warrior queen. After her husband was assassinated, she just exploded onto the scene, aggressively expanding her empire, carving out huge chunks of Roman territory. But the real moment of truth? 271 CE. She declares herself Augusta, an empress. I mean, that was a direct, audacious challenge to Rome itself, a power move that ultimately sealed her fate. But here's the thing, her military strength was maybe even surpassed by her political genius. And what's really wild is how she handled her branding. She was, and this is for the 3rd century, a master of public relations, carefully building an image that could appeal to completely different groups of people all at the same time. And you can see this perfectly in her name. Well, her names, plural. At home, she was Batsabai, her Aramaic name, which rooted her in the local culture. But to the wider world she wanted to conquer, she was Zenobia, life of Zeus. It's like she was code switching for the ancient world. She took this idea of divine power and packaged it perfectly for a Hellenistic audience. Absolutely genius. And that image, it stuck. Big time. This idea of a non-sectarian, anti-imperial Syrian leader has lasted for centuries. So much so that her face is on the Syrian 500-pound banknote today. Think about that. That is some serious staying power for a queen from the 200s. And this is where things get really tough. This is the central question we're tackling here. What good is a potent symbol of unity when the very nation it's supposed to represent is shattering from the inside out? So now we have to pivot to the present day, because the fall of the Assad regime in late 2024, well, it didn't bring peace. Instead, it kicked off this new, incredibly chaotic era of instability, a reality that is just a painful, stark contrast to that unifying myth of Zenobia. The conflict just shifted gears. You have a new government led by the Islamist group HTS, which is a massive ideological change. An attempt to bring the secular Kurdish-led SDF into the fold failed spectacularly, and that just sparked huge clashes in Aleppo. The state is basically at war with itself. And of course, into that power vacuum, who steps in? ISIS. They're making a comeback. And while all these factions are fighting for control, the human cost of this never-ending violence is it's staggering. I'm about to show you a couple of numbers, and honestly, they're hard to even wrap your head around. 7.4 million people. Just let that number sink in for a second. That's the number of Syrians who've been forced from their homes, but are still trapped inside the country. It is the highest number of internally displaced people anywhere in the world, period. And on top of that, you have 16.5 million people inside Syria who need humanitarian aid just to survive. To make all this suffering even worse, the country is going through the worst drought it's seen in decades. It is a catastrophe on every conceivable level. So with a crisis this massive, what's the response been from the outside, especially from Syrian communities that have been established for a long, long time? Well, this brings us to a really fascinating and kind of surprising case study all the way over in the Caribbean nation of Trinidad and Tobago. So, there's this very established, incredibly successful Syrian diaspora there. They're a tiny fraction of the population, but they are heavy hitters, economically and politically. The key thing to remember is their roots go back over a century. Their story of migration is completely different from the current refugee crisis. And this is where the disconnect becomes so clear. See, on paper, the government there adopted a national refugee policy way back in 2014. But in reality, they never actually passed the laws to make it happen. So the handful of modern Syrian refugees who are there today are stuck in this legal limbo, with no real protection. It's a total failure of the system. So what about that established, powerful diaspora? You might think they'd step in. Well, not exactly. Their charitable groups do important work, but their focus is entirely on local Trinidadian issues. The analysis points to this idea of a conscious distancing, a kind of strategic insulation to protect their politically neutral elite status in the country. And that brings us all the way back to where we started, to this huge conflict between a powerful, ancient symbol of unity and a fractured, modern reality of division and disconnection. It really is a clash of symbolism versus substance. Because here's the final, gut-wrenching irony in all of this. While the myth of Zenobia has never been stronger, her actual, physical city, the tangible history she represents, has been deliberately and systematically destroyed. In our lifetime. In recent years, ISIS went in and methodically destroyed Palmyra's most iconic monuments. The very same ancient theater where culture once thrived was used for public executions. And then, in this bizarre, almost surreal moment, the Russian military held a classical music concert on that exact same spot. The physical history is being erased and used as a political stage, even as the myth of it all just lives on. So, that leaves us with this one final massive question. When the tangible past is turned to dust, but its story, its symbol, remains this powerful, where does our duty truly lie? Is it to the carefully crafted myth of a queen from long ago, or is it to the millions of living, breathing people caught in the devastating reality of today?